Today, we're going to explore how businesses can use strategic partnerships to grow, reach new audiences, and think more creatively about collaboration.
From a brand standpoint, it also is great just in terms of building your brand credibility, your reputation. You can be associated with really trusted partners that can take a really long time to develop just you as a brand on your own. I would say that there's steps that you can take to make sure that you are properly able to capture and understand how successful the partnership was. So using tracking links, unique discount codes, or UTMs is really helpful.
And the other thing you mentioned, the beige flags. Always got to be aware of those beige flags.
Yeah, it's not just red.
Don't ignore those. It's not just the red flags. This is a marketing interview series where business owners and marketers come to learn clear, proven strategies that actually work. I'm your host, Melissa, a marketing strategist and agency owner. And each episode, we break down practical tactics and ways that you can grow your business to connect with your audience and get better results with less guesswork. Sarah Badun is the Vice President and General Manager of Casper Canada, with over 14 years of experience leading strategy across retail, CPG, and financial services. She's held senior roles at Jeweler, Bain, and BMO, and brings deep insight into building strong and scalable brands. Today, we're going to explore how businesses can use strategic partnerships to grow, reach new audiences, and think more creatively about collaboration. From finding the right partner to structuring deals that actually deliver results. Thanks so much for joining, Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me and for such a kind introduction.
Of course, you got it. You deserve it. Well, let's dive in. I know a lot of businesses might overlook B2B specific partnerships. So let's start with a bit of the big picture. Like, why should businesses seriously consider partnering in their growth strategy?
Yeah, it's a great place to kind of kick things off. I think that you even kind of touched on it, as part of the introduction. And so really it's there as an opportunity to increase your brand visibility. You're really able to tap into a completely new audience, potentially depending on who that partner is. But it's a very unique opportunity to be able to do that. As a result, you can also increase your customer acquisitions. You can expand your reach as well. But I think from a brand standpoint, it also is great just in terms of building your brand credibility, your reputation. You can be associated with really trusted partners that can take a really long time to develop just you as a brand on your own. When if there's another brand who's already been able to do this over time, you kind of easily get some of that credibility, especially if you're a small business, it can be hugely valuable. I think that there's, depending on what's important and critical for your business, there are a few other things to consider. And especially just reflecting on some of the experiences that I've had, it can be great in terms of opening doors for new creative campaigns, giving you new and fresh content. Content is king. So you really need to make sure that you're having a really clear pipeline of what that content is, particularly in my business. You can also tap into new expertise. So we've worked with some partners in the past who were really incredible from like a video content and storytelling standpoint. And that's just amazing to, again, be able to learn from them, be able to display that type of content, but now for your customer base. And then, of course, boost your sales. So there's really great, cool, interesting opportunities that you can do either from co-branded offers. You can do joint products or service bundles, et cetera, depending on what that partnership looks like. But again, it's just a really great way to kind of help boost your sales overall.
Yeah, that's such a good summary. And it goes to show that there's so many different ways that you can benefit from partnering with different businesses and collaborating together. And so one of the things that, it might sound like a good idea to partner with other businesses, but what should the first steps be once a business decides to explore partnerships and collaborations?
Yeah, I think, with any project, you really want to make sure that you're clear on what your objectives are and what your KPIs KPIs are. Like those aren't groundbreaking things to say, but I think it's just really critical that you are clear on what it is, because there's a lot that you can accomplish with these types of partnerships, whether it's to generate awareness, to generate sales, lead generation, market expansion. And so you can't have it all. And you really need to narrow down what is most important for your business at that time. Also, knowing that obviously with any business, your resources are finite and they're limited. Partnerships can take a lot of time and effort, and can be a distraction if it's not the right one. So just making sure that from day one, you feel really good about what those objectives are, and then how are you actually going to define success through those KPIs, whether it's reach, engagement, conversion, etc. From there, I would say it's then a matter of actually finding the right partner, or at least starting to do an assessment there. So you can see either internally, are there capabilities or areas that you would want to look to a partner to be able to better support you? What can they bring to the table? And then very conversely, what can you bring to the table? And I think it's really critical for you to have that conversation, because it's going to, in a lot of respects, you're going to have to kind of sell yourself to some of these businesses as well. And then the last two areas I would say are once you've been able to kind of start to think about who that potential partner is, you're identifying your target audience, what those overlaps are, where can you exchange value. And then, of course, you start to get into budget, timeline, and team responsibilities. But those are not really as much of the first initial steps, but definitely you'll move into that space fairly quickly afterwards.
Without a doubt. The very important part that you mentioned at the very beginning is really understanding what your KPIs are. Like, what are your goals, and aligning it to those specific goals. Because a lot of the time, collaborations can look like these one-off instances of, we're going to partner together just for whatever this joint offer might be. But how does it actually benefit your business and their business? Like you mentioned, a symbiotic relationship. So I'm glad you really, we're starting at focus on what your company goals are and build a
Mhm.
relationship or partnership so that can help achieve that, and obviously help achieve what that partner is looking for as well.
For sure, and then it's staying true to that, right? And because there may be partners that look really cool or sexy for your business, but if it's not actually there to help you in your business at the end of the day, it may feel really difficult to have to say no. But again, it's really prioritizing what is going to be most impactful for you as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I feel like there's a story there that we don't need to
Yes,
dive into.
but we
That's for
can't get
another
into that.
day.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, you kind of touched on this in the other question, but what's the right way, or right maybe criteria for identifying the right partner to collaborate with?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost is brand. Are you aligned? If you're not, or if there is potential risk to impact your brand equity, that's a huge area of focus. So it needs to be complementary to one another. And I would say that from a few different ways in terms of your values, and what you stand for, aesthetically, your tone of voice, but making sure that the brands are aligned is really, really critical. And then from there, it's thinking about what your audiences look like. What's that synergy? How are they similar, but how are they different or complementary? Again, so you know where you're able to tap into versus kind of operating within your own lanes. Then you can start to kind of peel back the next layer, and it's really around the compatibility with products and services. Really being clear on, is this a competitor too, right? Like I think that the lines around who is a competitor can get very unclear at certain points. It's a lot less clear cut in today's day and age. And so it's just being really, really clear on understanding how complementary your products and services are. And then, of course, your reputation, and their reputation, and really making sure that they have the credibility, and doing your due diligence to make sure that there's nothing in the media, et cetera, that would put that at risk. I also have found that a great indicator can also be what the partnership history is, because I think it goes to show that they have experience in this area. They would maybe have processes. They've been able to, their teams have been able to work with others in the past, and it just you kind of understand the willingness to collaborate that they might have. And so I think just knowing a little bit more about their partnership history can be really valuable. Um, and then lastly, I would say is the operational compatibility. And that's a very interesting one that I think we'll kind of dive into a bit more, but it's just the pace and scale and capabilities that they have from an operations standpoint is really critical to understand.
That's super helpful. And like you're almost in, as you're going through, I'm always mentally creating a checklist from goal alignment all the way down to brand alignment, audience, like complementary, audiences, all the way down to what you just mentioned into operationalism. And we will dive a little bit deeper into that. But there's a big vetting period, it sounds like. And this is something, it's a true partnership, and there needs to be a lot of collaboration in just that initial phase of, is this the right fit? Are there some early signs that a potential partner is or isn't likely to be collaborative or easy to work with that you can kind of share?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can so and I even just to finish off and kind of touch on what you were saying, it is a bit of an interesting and sometimes can feel a little bit awkward where you're kind of like courting one another to learn a little bit more about
Sounds
who they
like it.
are and how they work and what are you each responsible for. Like it's this kind of weird, there's no one taking the lead at this point because you're still kind of just sussing out who the other partner is.
Sure.
But for sure, there's some kind of early signs either way from the experience that I have had. In terms of some of the more green flags, definitely their communication style and how clear they are and just responsiveness. You can really go to see how big of a priority this is, just really based on those two factors. And as you're starting to assess who's responsible for what, what's their willingness to invest both their time and resources, because you really need them to be true partners in this whole process. And then really want to make sure there's transparency from day one. So again, going back to those objectives and KPIs, how open are they to communicate theirs as well? And of course, set up the measures in place that you would need, sign a mutual NDA, right? Just so that you can have those open conversations. But you really want to make sure that they're willing to, even after having signed something like that they are willing to openly discuss what their priorities are. And then more of like a depending on what you're interested in accomplishing from it. But I think just bringing new creative ideas and ways of looking at things, right? Like these partners are really an amazing opportunity just to tap into new people and new ways of looking at problems and how they think about their business. So I think it can be a really great early sign just to have some great open collaborative sessions.
Wonderful. And are there any, I guess you named good red flags and sorry, green flags, and the opposite would be the red flag if they're not communicative or if they're not willing to share. So that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. The As you mentioned, the collaborations allow you to tap into new creative space that maybe you haven't thought of before. That's
Yep.
that's what I love about collaboration and
Mhm.
collaborating with different business owners or different businesses as a whole.
Yeah,
So I'm
for
so
sure.
excited to get in to some of the examples of how Casper Canada has also collaborated with different businesses. Before we go there, though, one more question about just coming up with the partnership itself. If the conversation isn't going in the intended
Mm.
direction, and maybe your visions aren't aligned through those conversations you're having, what are ways that maybe you could pivot the opportunity?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that there's so many different flavors of what a partnership can be, right? You can have really short term, quick, we're doing a co-branded social post through to new products that you're developing or co-branded products with new packaging and separate logistics, etc. Multi-year. And I think that there's kind of everything in between those two realms. And so, even if you came into a conversation expecting or hoping that it may be a longer term partnership and it's not feeling right, or you're seeing some of those red or even beige flags, it's in those conversations that you can start to say, Maybe as an initial test or pilot, we start with something that's more of a stepping stone. And I think in general, a lot of businesses will be comfortable with that. Just knowing the amount of time and resources that can go into these bigger partnerships. But let's just test it out and start slow. And so I think if you kind of position it from that perspective, and you can suggest alternative formats such as these content collaborations on social or through an email campaign, as an example. And if even after that, if it's really not feeling comfortable, I think you just need to reflect on how you can be respectful and just kind of back away and say that it's not the right fit, but you wish them all the best. But hopefully you're able to kind of scale back depending on how far down the conversations you are, and just find at least something that's a bit lighter touch. But again, knowing when it's the right time also just to completely step away.
Right. Yeah, that's really good examples of how you don't necessarily need to fully step away if there's an opportunity, and maybe that's an opportunity to start building that relationship into something bigger. But
Yeah,
you're right, if it's not the right fit, you just gotta call a spade a spade.
you got it.
And the other thing you mentioned, the beige flags. Always got to be aware of those beige flags.
Yeah, it's not just
Don't
red
ignore
flags.
those. It's not just
Yes,
the red flags.
beige flags are real.
Yes. Okay, I'm really excited to dive into this next question because Casper Canada has done a ton of really cool collaborations. So, can you walk us through a couple of successful collaborations that Casper Canada has done?
Of course. So, and I'll give two examples. Again, one that was more lighter touch, and one that was a little bit more involved. So I'll start with the one actually that was a bit more involved. This was our partnership with Demello Coffee. Demello Coffee is a Toronto-based brand with Korean roots, and they have very much like a cult following of really, really loyal customer base. They have mostly sell their coffee through wholesale, but you would also maybe recognize some of the different cafes that they have around the GTA. That being said, they were amazing, amazing partners to us. We looked at a few different flavors of where we might be able to get involved, but ended up doing a co-branded product bundle with net new product. So the idea really stemmed from what are kind of shared rituals that each of our customer bases have. And so for Demello, that was a lot around morning coffee, and for Casper, it's really restful sleep. And so we saw this as an opportunity to say, think of those days that you have the best sleep, and then you wake up and have an amazing cup of coffee and you feel like you have superpowers,
Yeah,
right? Like you can take on the world. So
exactly.
we did two sleep masks, and the first sleep mask was a winky eye sleep mask, which is kind of an iconic Casper element that we use in a lot of our products. And then the second eye mask was based on the Demello character whose name is Felix. He's a tiger, and he has kind of these googly eyes that point in different directions, with then co-branded packaging. And the kind of funny idea was like, do you sleep more like a Felix, or do you sleep more as a Casper, more restful sleep? And then we added to that was a Casper coffee blend. So the team went and actually developed out, what would be those tastes and elements that feel really Casper coming through in the coffee. So it was a super fun partnership. It came together in like a silk bag, and we did a lot of fun content coming out of it too. Some larger storytelling through content, product placement online and in stores. We had influencer amplification as well, and it really just complemented each of our brands because we have a very well-known brand here at Casper, very iconic, wide reach. And it was complemented by Demello, who's has a much more, as I said, cult, really, really loyal audience. And it really allowed us to tap into their space and vice versa, with a really kind of fun story around it. So, yeah, that was the fun partnership that we did earlier this year. And it went so well. We're looking at ways that we can kind of continue to build off of that.
I love that. That's the creativity behind it, and even leveraging existing product that you have, but then creating that sort of joint collaborative product both ways. And I think Casper had a specific drink in the cafes as well, right?
Yeah, so at their different locations, you could get a Casper latte, and they even did some art on the top with the winky eye. So it was really fun, and I should say that we actually sold out of our inventory, which was incredible, and just saw a ton of new customers actually coming onto our site and actually purchasing other products, not just the bundle that we did with them. So really, really great outcomes
That's amazing. Yeah, that's honestly, it's such a really cool collaboration and goes to show that it's very multi-channel. You're not just looking at a joint product. There's multiple ways to really activate and embrace that collaboration.
for sure.
And
Sure.
just out of curiosity, from ideation to go to market, what was that time? What did that time span look like?
It was about 6 months where we initially kicked off conversations, and, as I said, we kind of started by brainstorming really big. Do we do some sort of activation? Are we starting to help with a store opening as an example? And then we really said, let's hone in on our product. Let's use this as a, jumping off point. And then in future, as the partnership evolves, then we can look at doing some of these amplifications. So then actually getting the product in, packaging, and then the logistics piece, which we haven't had time to touch on that yet, but is very, very critical, especially as a brand that does not sell food or beverage. Really critical for us to get that right. And then through to actually selling was, yes, about 6 months.
Okay. And were there any other Casper Canada collaborations that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, so I think just to showcase that not every single partnership has to be product and some of these bigger, larger investments, just wanted to touch on as well a partnership that we did with Dermalogica, which is a skincare brand, and we did a co-branded influencer PR package with them. So no net new product. Again, really great partners to work with, focused on more holistic wellness, so beauty, sleep meets skincare. The bundled PR package was came together with actually a few other brands, and then were distributed out to the influencer list that Dermalogica has. And we were able to get a ton of new content from these influencers. Now, of course, you don't have any kind of influencer control over what they're actually posting,
Right.
but we knew that Dermalogica had great relationships with the kind of influencer list that they were that they were sending this product to. So it was great just in terms of getting us more of that awareness. There was an educational component as well as they talked a bit more about our product. But this really was a focus on social media. So a great way for us to kind of test out new audience segments for both brands.
That's really cool and a great example. And also just really neat to show the creative angles of how you can collaborate. Sleep is such an essential part of everybody's life, but it's really cool to see that, you can partner with different brands from skincare to coffee and that food and beverage area. And I know that there's many, many more. But thank you for sharing those examples. And, you kind of touched on the operational side of things. And I would love to dive a little bit deeper into that because we haven't chatted about it just yet. So, you found some really great partners to collaborate with. How did you plan to structure a smooth to ensure that there was a smooth launch?
Yeah, so as I said, kind of earlier, just make sure that you're getting a mutual NDA, so you can speak openly. And I would say, depending on which organization would have more structured legal process, I would start by using their MNDA. It's just going to be
Okay.
easier than them signing yours. So just have a really open conversation as part of this detailed kickoff, understand your roles and responsibilities, and be clear about what your strengths are, and hopefully that they'll do the same on what those goals are and what the deliverables are. I think then really critical that you're clear on what the creative direction is too, and your brand guardrails. Like, where are you willing to actually move this brand? Because again, it's a totally different territory. So you'll have to just really make sure that you feel confident and comfortable that this is the direction that your brand is going to be associated with going forward. being then clear, of course, on your timelines, key milestones, as you would expect with any other kind of big project, and then coordinating your launch plan. So, what's the marketing plan? What's your logistics? What's your PR? And logistics again cannot be overlooked. And so, maybe this is the point to kind of dive into this a little bit further. But Demello is really a great example of that, where we had no expertise in distributing coffee. And so we just needed to rely on them. Our warehouses were not set up and legally are not allowed to carry coffee, even if it is packaged and closed, not even that we're just actually selling it. Brewed. So we had to be very clear on we can't actually house any of this product. It has to be held and therefore distributed at their warehouse. So it's getting into that kind of nitty gritty that you have to make sure you're really clear on. But then the next step is, okay, if they're actually distributing all of this and fulfilling those orders, how are you actually transmitting your orders? Are you doing this manually? How frequently are you sending it
Mm-hmm.
through? Because you have to make sure that you're meeting those delivery timelines also, that you're guaranteeing to your customers. But it can be really, really cumbersome. And especially based on how company systems are set up, a lot of times will end up just being manual work. And so you have to make sure that you have the right people there to actually help process and communicate these orders back and forth between the two. And then I would say just make sure that you're building in the right checkpoints to review your progress and then able to adjust accordingly.
Wow. Yeah, some really, really great points. You mean you touched on operationalizing that whole process, and I wouldn't even think about storage. And yeah, I mean their expertise is food and beverage. That's not necessarily Casper Canada's. So how you manage that and how you have those conversations, that's incredibly important to establish pretty early on in the process too.
For sure. And then even beyond that as well, that's just talking about the product when you were distributing it online. We also have retail stores and we wanted to be able to sell these at the retail stores. But you can't, in a lot of mall locations, they're very restrictive on only being able to sell your product, or they'll have a coffee shop nearby and the coffee shop has stated that you're not allowed to be able to sell coffee within a given range. So you have to make sure that you're
Whoa.
speaking with the landlords also. And so we actually came up with ways of like we displayed the product, but we'd actually never fulfill in those stores. So you just have to make sure that you're really thinking through each of these steps so that you don't run into a hiccup where you're like, oh my goodness, I actually can't sell this in the way that I thought I would be able to.
Yeah, that you had intended. Wow, really, really, really like great points to consider and try and think through all those different scenarios before you actually, go a little bit too far.
For sure. And so that's where I would also just touch on that it's really important that although a lot of times these are marketing initiatives, operations and your ops team need to be brought in sooner rather than later, just so that they can start to advise on some of this. And then again, depending on your channel mix, we also had our real estate team involved who was able to speak with the different landlords, but just really making sure that team members are brought in earlier and sooner rather than later, just so that you don't face any of these hiccups too far down.
Yeah, a true testament to collaboration doesn't necessarily just mean between two organizations, but really amongst your own teams as well.
For sure.
Okay, so you touched on fulfillment a little bit. How does fulfillment usually work in these collaborations, especially when
Mhm.
there's physical products involved?
Yeah, I think it's really clear to make sure that you are deciding early on what kind of shipping method are you going to have. So, are you doing a drop ship model as an example? How are you actually then going to package these products? Because, again, in a lot of these cases, it's going to be products that you have not really any familiarity with in terms of your existing packaging. So, you'll have to source new. And then the other pieces, are you doing shared or separate fulfillment? And again, some of that may just be restricted based on, in our case, we can't actually warehouse any food and beverage as an example, right? You also need to make sure that you're really clear on your inventory planning and your quality standards. Those are both really critical so that you're able to meet your customer expectations. And also that you're not left with a whole bunch of inventory that you don't know what to do with, especially when it gets into this co-branded product. You can be left with a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want. So just make sure that you're doing the proper inventory planning. And if anything, you can skew on the side where you're doing less inventory to sell out, and then you can always revitalize this partnership again. I would then be really clear on what those shipping timelines are. As I said, you need to make sure that you're meeting your customer expectations, but also, of course, the expectations of your partners, customers as
Mm,
well. And then you get into what are the returns? Can you actually return this product? Is there a trial period?
true.
What's the customer service policy as well? If they're phoning in with Demello and they have questions about the coffee, are you answering those questions or are you actually diverting those questions back to their customer service team? So you have to really think through both the pre-purchase as well as the post-purchase experience. I think that there's a lot of challenges that can come up through this, either kind of your misaligned on packaging, fulfillment. There will be unanticipated delays, like your product is showing up late, as an example. So just make sure that you're building in enough buffer time to have these big conversations because they can be really meaty and full of a lot of discussion, and that you have any contingency plans if things don't go as you had originally planned.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the as you're mentioning that, the fulfillment, operations, customer service, you're really touching on the fact that this is truly omni-channel and that collaborations are a great opportunity to expand to new markets, new audiences, potentially build new business growth. But you really do need to consider all the different angles that are involved, or parts of the business that are involved. And so you mentioned build in realistic buffers. So what would a realistic time frame look like from partnership kickoff all the way to market launch?
Yeah, it definitely varies depending on how involved your partnership is. So I would say if you look at the Dermalogica partnership, which was much less involved, still great collaboration for us. And again, to have a great mix of small and large. That one was about 6 to 8 weeks, and then as I said, Demello was 6 months. But I would allot for some of those bigger ones, and depending on the size of the organization that you're working with, it could be anywhere from kind of 4 to 12 months. And especially as you start to think of how complex is the product that you're having to potentially source and bring in, if it is coming from overseas or your packaging is coming from overseas, that's where a lot of these timelines can really start to get longer. And then also just the complexity of having to get approvals, et cetera, depending on the size of the business. But it's just making sure that you're building in enough time to allow for any potential delays, to allow for enough discussion, and to really be able to think through kind of each of the things that we've touched on today. And then, of course, do not forget. A lot of businesses are very seasonal. So if you're starting to do a partnership in, October, just know that things may get derailed because November, December are huge, huge sales periods for a lot of retail businesses. So if you are wanting to meet specific timelines, especially around those key holidays, just make sure you factor that in because teams will be pulled in a number of different directions.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, seasonality is huge and every business is impacted by it in some way or another. So those are really good windows. And that's also nice to hear that, yeah, the smaller partnerships are the ones that maybe aren't as expansive across all the different business service lines can be, 8 weeks long, which is might be more feasible to
Mhm.
some other businesses. And so when it comes to leading and kicking off the partnership, how do you determine who actually leads? You were the partner.
Yeah, it's and again, it kind of feels like that weird, like you're picking a school project, is it you? Is it me? Like,
Yeah,
who's
who's
taking
gonna
the
raise their
lead on
hand?
this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would just say, like, have one clear point of contact on either side, who is really funneling any of those requests back and forth. And then just kind of talk through what are the different tasks that you have to get done, content creation, fulfillment, analytics, etc. And I just kind of found if you put your hand up and say, we're really great at content, I think this is an area that we'd be able to lead. You'll find that they'll typically reciprocate and say, this is actually an area that we're better at. And if it starts to get into the like, who's doing packaging, you can just kind of open the conversation and be like, is this something that you're interested in doing? Or would you prefer that we take it on? And I think just having kind of realistic and open conversations is usually the best way to go about that. And then of course, just make sure that you're holding regular check-ins to troubleshoot, but of course also celebrate wins. Very important as you're going through these partnerships because it's a lot of time and effort, as we'd said. So it's really great to be able to just pause and reflect and be excited by the progress you're making.
Right on.
Mm.
Okay. So thank you for going over that. I like the idea of, or how you mentioned, play on each other's strengths and be open in terms of areas that you're unsure of whether it's a good fit or not. That's what makes any relationship good. Just be honest.
I agree. Yes, and
Um,
communicate.
Communication, yeah, is
Yeah.
so important. And so, say you've successfully launched the collaboration. How do you track and report on success? And, what KPIs really matter when you're evaluating the success of that collaboration?
Yeah. So again, it really goes back to what was critical in terms of the objectives that you had set up front, and of course the KPIs that you had set up front. But a few examples could be your impressions, engagement, conversions, or revenue. I would say that there's steps that you can take to make sure that you are properly able to capture and understand how successful the partnership was. So using tracking links, unique discount codes, or UTMs is really helpful. And then both sides, if both partners are selling, then you'll have to share performance reports on either end. And I would do it at kind of agreed upon times, 2 weeks after launch, 1 month after launch, et cetera, et cetera. And I would also include qualitative feedback. It's not just the quantitative as well, but what customer feedback are you getting? Is there press coverage? Are you getting comments on social media that you would want to share? And it's just great to understand what that sentiment is. And then setting up any kind of postmortem debriefs, and really just use it also as an opportunity to refine for future collaborations. And then very critical is just to stay in touch, understand what's happening in their business, where can you kind of continue to play together and again, build off of one another's strengths.
Oh, right. Yeah, right on. I think you touch on everything that is super important about just tracking in general. And I
Yeah.
love that you mentioned, understanding the sentiment too. That's something that sometimes does get overlooked, but it's like, yeah, what are people saying? Let's hear it. Let's talk
Yeah,
about it. Let's
exactly.
share it, whether good or bad. That just helps you understand what the momentum looks like. How did you come to find or establish that Dermalogica and Demello Coffee were good brands for you to, kind of go out to for a collaboration opportunity?
So, in our case, it was actually some were inbound and some were outbound. So, Dermalogica actually reached out to us, and I think it was just through social media. I believe that they connected, so that was great, of course, and obviously always open to having those conversations. I know for a lot of brands, you can just include somewhere on your website as well, like interested in discussing a partnership, feel free to reach us at whatever kind of shared inbox it is. So that's always a great way to get those inbound leads. And then on the Demello side, it was actually through our network. There was a member of our team who knew someone there, and we were able to reach out with that to them through that connection. And I would say honestly, that's how a lot of these things are done is through connection. So if you are a small business, it would be a matter of starting to get out into those different networking events where you are getting more familiar or have access to some of these brands that you may not already have connections with. But I think that's a really great way versus just doing kind of a cold reach out. It can
Hmm.
be a lot harder to find the right person, etc.
Wonderful. Okay. So it's really cool that they reached out via social media. Social
Yes,
media is the connector tool of all connector tools right
it
there.
really is.
That's really neat. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I think that's the interesting part is that you can build these relationships and partnerships through many different mediums and channels.
Yeah.
Really can depend on your network or can depend on your outreach. Thank you so much for sharing all this information. Super insightful. I took away a lot. I know a lot of other business owners and marketers will too. And I really appreciate your time and joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great catching up. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and it's nice to kind of go down memory lane with some of the great partners that we've worked with, and lots of fun things coming up as well. So keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, I can't wait to see other fun collaborations that Casper Canada has. Is there anything you want to share about that, or is there anything you want to, give like a sneak peek to?
Yes, keep your eyes peeled, likely towards the end of a summer for an activation with a pretty cool brand.
All right, right on. Okay, I'm gonna be definitely keeping my eyes peeled. Thank you so much again, Sarah, and I will we'll definitely keep in touch.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mel. Appreciate it.
Of course.